Hello and welcome to Hunters of the Sky, the education program attached to Sardis Raptor Rehabilitation Center. Sardis was founded in 1989 as an all-species wildlife center. We took in everything from swans, songbirds, to wolves and deer. We practiced the 3 R's, what we like to call rescue, rehabilitation, and release. That was our main goal, getting injured animals back out to the wild. Now in 1995, we had a large influx of poisoned bald eagles. And it's very expensive. You have to pay for surgery to remove the poisoned food, medication, and lots of muscle training to get the birds back to their full strength from all the damage they've sustained. We went through a large portion of our budget in a small space of time. In order to keep our doors open, we had to specialize. We went from being an all-species wildlife center to just a raptor center. Now raptors, or birds of prey, are birds that hunt with their feet. Hawks, eagles, owls, and falcons. Those are the creatures that Sardis specializes in. And as I said before, our main goal is release back to the wild. Unfortunately, some animals sustain injuries that are just too severe and prevent them from surviving on their own. As long as they're comfortable around people, we make them education ambassadors, and those are some of the birds we're going to introduce to you today. All these birds have permanent injuries that prevent their release back into the wild, but can still live comfortably with people. And so we use them to teach people, to teach the public, about the wonderful animals that share our skies. So this is Heyoki, our Harris hawk. Harris hawks are not native to the Northwest. They're actually desert birds. They're found down in Texas, Arizona, and down into Mexico itself. Heyoki was a captive bred bird, bred to be a falconer's bird. Falconers are some of the only people in North America who are allowed to have captive birds of prey who are native. The only other ways you can have native birds are if you're a rehabilitator trying to get the bird back out to the wild, or if you're an educator and you have the bird for education, like we have with all of our birds. Now Heyoki was a bit small to be a hunter, and so he didn't make a good falconry bird, and so instead of becoming a falconry bird, he ended up being an education bird. We purchased him to come live here at Sardis. Now Harris hawks are unique in the raptor world because they're actually very social. Most birds of prey are solitary. They live with their mate and chicks during breeding season, but are otherwise on their own. Harris hawks, by contrast, live in large flocks. They hunt together and raise their young together. Out in Arizona, it can get very, very hot, and so on warm days, they'll actually spread their wings and provide shade for their chicks, and they do hunt cooperatively. Now, a small bird like Heyoki could only hunt something the size of maybe a robin or a rat, but working together, Harris hawks in the wild can take down jackrabbits, which is a very large desert hare. What they do is they scare the hare out of the bush, and as it takes off running across the desert, it's going to zigzag. Now, you see Heyoki's nice long tail? In the bird world, your tail is your steering wheel and your brakes. The longer your tail is, the more maneuverable you are. So Harris hawks with that very long tail can turn on a dime. And as this rabbit is zigzagging across the desert, trying not to be dinner, the Harris hawks can zigzag after it. And they don't have the entire flock chase it at once. They'll have 1 or 2 kind of herding it, keeping it out in the open. And as their hawks get tired, they'll fall back and somebody else from the family will take over. And so they just tag team this rabbit until it's too tired to keep flying. You can see Heyoki raising his wings, kind of catching a little bit of the breeze. Now, because Heyoki is our only Harris hawk and they're very social, he's very attuned to the volunteers. He was raised around people, so he's very socialized to human, and he kind of considers the volunteers his surrogate flock. Heyoki will talk to us, croon to us, and he very much wants our attention. He actually still makes a very quiet chirping noise under his breath, which is Harris hawk baby noise. We think the reason he still makes it is because we're still here taking care of him, we provide him all the food he could want, and he doesn't have to hunt. Now, that's not to say that Heyoki can't hunt. He's perfectly physically healthy, just too socialized to people to release. And so if a robin or something else were to sneak into his enclosure, he'll be more than capable of hunting it. You can see he's got those nice long toes, nice sharp talons. And while he's looking at his equipment, I want to make a note about his legs. Because Harris hawks are desert birds, they're built for the heat. You can see that his feathers stop at that upper joint there, and he's got very long, bare ankles. That's to help him keep cool. In the summers, when it gets very hot, Harris hawks can flush extra blood through the veins in their legs, and then the heat from that blood will dissipate through their skin. The cooler blood then recirculates through their body and cools the rest of the bird off. Kind of like the radiator in a car. These guys have their own built-in air conditioning system. Now, while he's looking at his equipment, might as well talk about equipment. All of our birds have standard falconry equipment. They have the alamars, or anklets around their legs, and then those long jesses, those leather straps that hang down and that are attached to the leash. This is actually for the bird's protection. Because our birds aren't safe to release into the wild, it would be dangerous for them if they got away from us. This keeps them safe, kind of like when you're walking a dog and you have them on a leash so they don't run out into traffic. Birds of prey have very strong legs because they hunt with their legs, and so as long as you have equipment on both legs, it's not going to hurt them if they get curious, fly around, or jump off the glove. You can see Heyoki's held pretty close to his handler. All of our birds have their own comfort zone when they're on the glove. Some of them, like Heyoki, a very socialized bird, want to be held close, they want to see what you're doing, and they're very curious about you. Others want to keep their distance, they want to be able to see around them, and just keep an eye on things. Now Heyoki is 18, let's see, he was born in 1998, so he's actually 21 years old this year, which is pretty old for a Harris hawk. In the wild, these birds would live 15, maybe 18 years. But in captivity, without needing to hunt for his food, and without having to worry about growing old and slowing down, he could live to be into his 20s, even his 30s. But we have noticed a little bit around his beak, he's getting a few gray feathers here and there. He's starting to show his age, at least in looks, if not in personality. Now his name Heyoki actually comes from a Lakota Sioux word Heyoka, which means trickster or one who does things backwards. And we named him this because of his very social nature. As I said, he's very comfortable around the volunteers, he sees us as his surrogate flock, and he does interact with us. He's been known to rearrange not the decorations, but the decor, the furnishings in his enclosure, moving the branches and perches where he'd prefer. He'll also pick flowers that grow in his enclosure. And he likes to interact with us. We have to go in every day, provide him fresh food and water, which means lots of scrubbing, cleaning the feeding platforms, scrubbing out the water pans. And to make sure that we spend more time with him, Heyoki will take and hide our scrub brushes, because he knows if they can't find the scrub brush, we can't leave yet, and we can spend more time with him. He also wants to do what we want to do. He's very cooperative. He wants to be a participating member of the flock. And so he sees us scrubbing his feeding platform, and we've occasionally seen him pick up a rock and drag it across the platform in the same scrubbing motion. He's trying to emulate what we do, and it shows that he's a very clever and observant bird. You can see his beautiful wings, and as I mentioned, Heyoki is on the small side for a Harris hawk. In the raptor world, males are smaller than females, and Heyoki is going to be in the lower half of the size range because he's a male, but even so, he's a pretty small bird. And a female would be, I'd say, about a head taller than he is. But he's still a very handsome and healthy member of the species. So I think we'll end there on Heyoki just because he's getting a little bit agitated since this is his first show for the fair. He's a very handsome bird. He's dignified.
Very handsome bird. Sit still. And he's been squeaking at me the whole time.
So this is Spot, our barred owl, and Spot is a local. Barred owls were originally found on the east coast, but over the years they worked their way westward through the forests of Canada and kind of introduced themselves to the region, and so they're now found all along the Pacific Northwest. And you may be asking, why is he called a barred owl? And that's spelled B-A-R-R-E-D, named for the bars or stripes that I promise he does have on the front of him. You're only seeing his speckled back right now. It's their name for those bars. We actually have one of their cousins here in Washington as well, the spotted owl. And where barred owls have bars, spotted owls have spots. They're two very closely related species. Barred owls are Strix virea, and spotted owls are Strix occidentalis. And they're actually closely enough related that the two species can interbreed. There have been a few documented cases of half barred owl, half spotted owl crosses. Now, like a mule from a horse and a donkey, those chicks themselves won't be able to have eggs, but they can still grow up and live a healthy and normal life. Now, when Spot here first came to Sardis, we weren't sure what he is. He was a youngster, at least we think he was a youngster. And he didn't have all of his adult feathers, and we were trying to figure out, is he a barred owl, is he a spotted owl, because they do look very similar. They have a similar size, similar color pattern. Barred owls tend to have a little bit more brown in them as compared to gray, and of course the spots and the stripes grow in as they get older. But Spot didn't have those yet, and so we had to make our best guess. Now, as you may have guessed from his name Spot, we didn't originally think he was a barred owl. We thought he might have been a half barred owl, half spotted owl cross. And there are a couple of reasons we made this mistake. One, he's fairly small for a barred owl, and if he had been a mixture of a spotted owl, which are smaller, and a barred owl, that could have accounted for his size. Another problem was his hoot. All owls have their own distinctive call. Barred owls are supposed to go, but that wasn't the noise Spot was making. Spot was going, which isn't barred owl noise, and it isn't spotted owl noise. Now, owl calls are instinctive. They don't need to hear them to learn them. Chicks start practicing fairly young, and it isn't something they have to learn from their parents. We've had various chicks over the years who were orphaned, and they learned their owl calls just fine. But if Spot had been a mixture of a barred owl and a spotted owl, that could have messed with his instinctive hoot. And so we heard this odd call, we looked at his size, and we thought, maybe he's a half barred owl, half spotted owl. Well, he grew up, and it turns out he's all barred owl. But there are still a couple of interesting things about Spot. As I said, he came to us fairly young. He was found in a train yard. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but we suspect he hit something, either the ground, maybe a car, hopefully not an actual train. But we didn't find any physical injuries when we picked him up. He didn't have any broken bones, no scrapes or things like that, but he was very, very skinny and he was covered in bugs. When birds of prey can't fly, if they're chicks or if they're injured in some reason and they're stuck on the ground, they tend to develop bugs and they can't groom themselves enough to clean themselves up. And so with Spot, we knew he'd been on the ground for a long time because he was covered in bugs and he was very, very thin. So our first priority was getting him fed, getting him to a stable weight, and then figuring out how to get him flying out in the wild. Now with chicks, it's very important that you don't imprint the birds. When birds of prey are young, they don't know what they are. They're raised by their parents and they imprint on their own species. Now this works great in the wild, but if you have a chick in a rehab center, you have to make sure they don't imprint on people, because if they do, then they think they're human beings instead of birds. And it can be very confusing for them. It means they're looking to humans to model correct behavior. They're looking for humans when it's breeding season. They're looking for humans to teach them how to fly and how to hunt, and we just aren't equipped for that. Also, because they think of humans as their own species, they lose all of their natural aggression to people, which is not what you want in a wild bird. So we were very careful with Spot not to imprint him. We cover their enclosures when they're in the intensive care unit with sheets so they can't see us. We don't hand feed them, we don't snuggle them or talk to them, we keep them away from people. And as soon as possible, we get them to an outside enclosure. If we're lucky, they'll come in as part of a clutch and we can keep them with their siblings, which is a great way to ensure they know what they are. In Spot's case, he was by himself, so we kept him isolated from people and moved him to our outside conditioning flight as soon as possible. And we had high hopes for Spot. He's physically healthy. We thought for sure this would be an easy release. Chicks are some of the easiest injuries we have to deal with just because they are physically healthy and they just need to grow up to maturity and learn how to fly and hunt. So we put Spot outside, lovely outdoor enclosure. We have big flights out behind the public area, and the idea is they will fly because if they've been in rehab for a while, they need to build up their flight muscles. They've got to do their physical therapy. And in Spot's case, they have to actually learn how to fly and learn how to hunt, which can take a while for the chicks. So we put Spot out there, and he was doing his little hoot hoot call, and he wasn't trying to fly, and he wasn't trying to hunt, and he just sat there and he completely stopped eating. Now we monitor all of our birds' food intake because birds of prey don't want to show you when they're not feeling well. They don't want to show that vulnerability because in the wild that could make them a target for predators. And so they're going to go, I'm fine, I'm healthy, but if they're not eating, it means something's wrong. So we brought him inside, checked him over, make sure he hadn't hurt himself, make sure nothing in the enclosure was falling down or scaring him, and got him eating well in the clinic, figured out what his favorite foods were. We feed our birds a variety of foods. We have chickens that are donated from a local farmer that we feed more or less whole. We gut them and cut the feet off, but we leave on the feathers and we leave in the organs, like the hearts and the lungs. And we also purchase rats to the tune of, I think, about $6,000 a month for all of our birds because we feed about 45 pounds of food a day. And so some birds prefer chicken because they're bird eaters. Some birds prefer rats because they're mammal eaters. In Spot's case, rats were the way to go, since barred owls hunt for small rodents like mice and voles. Got him eating well in the clinic, moved him back outside, and he promptly stopped eating again. And we did this a couple of times, moving him back and forth from the clinic, the intensive care unit, out to the wild flight, and he just would not eat when he was outside. We suspect that Spot has some kind of head injury that he received when he fell out of his nest as a youngster. And because of that, he doesn't have all of his correct instincts. That would be why he doesn't hoot correctly. It would be why he wasn't eating when he was outside. So unfortunately, even though he's physically healthy, Spot doesn't have the instincts to survive in the wild, and so we made him an education bird instead. Now since then, we have successfully transitioned Spot to an outdoor enclosure, but it took us years to get him to do that. And he has actually since learned how to hoot like a barred owl, but that took about 3 years, and he needed to learn from another barred owl. We have another permanent resident barred owl, Clove, and Clove hoots up a storm. And over years and years of listening to Clove hoot, Spot finally learned how to answer back, and he can do the full barred owl call, although he rarely does. It took him also 3 years to learn how to fly. And for reference, barred owls should learn how to fly in about, I think it's about 2 weeks when they start fledging and they start actually trying to fly. And again, it took Spot much longer. But he is a physically healthy bird, and he's one of our calmest education birds. He's very comfortable standing very close to his handler. In the wild, barred owls perch standing right next to the trunks of trees, and so Spot treats his handler like a tree trunk, and he'll stand right next to you and be very calm. When we go to the fairs, we're always not sure the very first time we bring a bird out if they're going to be comfortable around people. We can test them all we want with the volunteers, but you never know how they're going to react to the public. The very first fair we brought Spot to, we were stationed next to the arena, and we were really worried about rodeo night when they have all the loud noises and the sirens, and there was a truck rally going on. And we looked over at Spot. They had a demolition derby going, and he slept through the whole thing. He's a very calm bird. It makes him a very good education ambassador. Now let's have some interesting facts about owls. Owls are nocturnal. This means they hunt at night, and owls are specialized for this darkness hunting. They have very large eyes that allow them to take in the maximum amount of light possible. In fact, owl eyes are so large, they touch inside their heads. They have a bony ring around each eye, which secures them in place, so they can't actually move their eyes from side to side. This means that in order to look around, owls have to move their entire heads. Now, owls can turn their heads 270 degrees in each direction. That's the equivalent of about 3/4 of a circle, so not all the way around, but pretty far. And the reason they can do this is because they have more bones in their neck than we do. You and I have 7 bones in our neck. Owls like Spot have 14 bones, so that gives them a lot more flexibility. Owls also have excellent hearing. Their ears are lopsided, so where you and I have one ear at the same spot on each side of our head, owls have one ear higher up in their skulls and one ear farther back. This means that they can hear in 3D. They can tell if a sound is coming from in front of them, behind them, from the left or right, and even how high off the ground it is. And the acuity of their hearing varies by species. One of the best would be the barn owl, not to be confused with barred owls. Barn owls, B-A-R-N, are another kind of owl we have here in Washington State. They have a kind of creamy white stomach and a speckled cinnamon brown and gray back. They're beautiful owls with a distinctive heart-shaped facial disc. Barn owls can catch a mouse in complete darkness. There was someone who had a falconry bird, and they put the bird in a completely dark room, no source of light, with a mouse, and the owl used hearing alone to do the hunt. So they have amazing ears. Owls also have silent flight, because if you want to hear your prey, you don't want to make too much noise yourself. And if you're hunting in the darkness, whatever you're chasing is also going to have good hearing, and you want to be able to sneak up on it. So owls have a very soft outline. You can see they're much rounder than hawks and eagles. And that helps them blend in, helps them kind of muffle their sound as they fly. They have very broad wings, which slows their flight down. And they actually have a ragged leading edge to their primary feathers. And that ragged edge kind of breaks up the air currents and really does make them silent flyers. Again, tests were done with barn owls, another owl here in Washington State, where they had these very strong microphones set up to detect the sound of the owls flying over. And they flew the owls over the microphone and couldn't detect a thing, even though they were flying directly overhead. Now, all owls also have a facial disc. It's a ring of feathers around their eyes, and that helps them actually with their hearing. They can change the shape of that facial disc, laying the feathers flat or putting them straight out to the side to funnel sound to their ears and pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from. Owls also have a different toe pattern than hawks and eagles. Where hawks and eagles have 3 toes in the front of their foot and 1 toe in back, that way they can grab with the front 3 toes and stab with the back toe, the hallux, to do their killing, owls have a 2 and 2 toe pattern. This gives them a more stable grip because owls are more likely to squeeze their prey or to bite it to finish it off rather than killing with their talons. And so the owl toe pattern is called zygodactyl, and the 3 and 1 toe pattern is called polydactyl. So just a different toe pattern for a different kind of bird. Owls also have feathering all the way down to the tips of their toes. This provides them, one, with warmth for hunting at night when it's colder, and also with protection from rodent bites, because it makes their skin a little bit slipperier when the rodent bites down, because you really don't want your dinner biting you back. So that's Spot, our barred owl. We'll send him back and bring out our next bird, introduce our next bird to you. You can see he's standing very close to his handler, kind of watching what's going around, but he's pretty calm and relaxed. All right, this is Winagi, our bald eagle. Now, Winagi came to us as a very young chick. He was in a nest by the side of a man-made lake, and unfortunately they raised the level of the lake water. It swamped the tree, and the tree came crashing down. Winagi and his sibling were trapped in the wreckage of their nest for about a week before anyone found them. Now, when eagles fall out of the nest at that young an age, there's nothing their parents can do to protect them. There are just too many predators. It's too hard to raise a chick on the ground. And so he and his sibling were alone in their nest, uncared for a full week, and they were very badly injured. They were rushed to our center as soon as we found them. Unfortunately, Winagi's sibling didn't make it. They died in transit to the center, and that's why his name is Winagi. It means ghost or spirit of the eagle, and we named him in honor of his sibling. Now, when Winagi first came to us, he was in pretty bad shape. He had a compound wing fracture of his left wing. That means the bone was actually sticking out of the skin, and when bone is exposed to air, it dies, and so he had an inch of dead bone sticking out of his skin. We had to trim that off and pin it as best we could and hope for the best. Because Winagi was so young, he was still laying down calcium, and he was very lucky. The bone actually regrew that missing inch, and the 2 sides connected, and x-ray showed that it was straight. We had high hopes that Winagi would be a releasable bird. We made sure not to imprint him. We kept him away from people, made sure that he knew he was an eagle, and as soon as possible, we put him in our eagle flight. This is a long 100-foot enclosure. It's used to condition birds, especially eagles, to make sure they're strong enough to go back out to the wild. And in Winagi's case, he had to learn how to fly. And again, we had high hopes that he would be a releasable bird rather than an education bird. And so he got out into the enclosure, he stretched out his wings, and he took off, and he flopped as hard as he could, and he went about 20 feet. It's like, okay, that's not bad for a first try. And then he kind of got his breath, tried again, went about 30 feet. We left him out there for feeding him, giving him his food and water every day. And he'd fly and he'd land after 30 feet. And then he'd fly and he'd land after 30 feet. And then he'd fly and he'd land after 30 feet. And unfortunately, 30 feet was as far as Winagi ever went. We took a closer look at his wing, stretched out, put him under ISO to have a look, and it turns out that while he was healing, there was some tendon damage, and one of the tendons got twisted, and unfortunately, Winagi has a gap in his feathers. You can kind of see it right here. It's right between some of the feathers, and it looks like when he stretches his wing out that he's got a gap of about 1 feather. It doesn't look like much, and you wouldn't think that would be a problem, but when he's flying, air goes through that gap, and he can't maintain a cushion of air when he's flying, and that cushion of air is very important. Eagles actually don't flap all the time when they fly. They flap to get airborne, and then they soar on that cushion of air. And Winagi can't soar. And so after 30 feet, he's exhausted because he has to flap constantly to stay upright. And unfortunately, that means that Winagi is grounded. He'll never be a releasable bird because with only 30 feet of flight distance, he can't hunt for himself, he can't get away from predators, and he wouldn't be able to survive on his own. So at that point, when we realized that he was going to be a permanent resident, we transitioned him into our education program, and he's been the star of Hunters of the Sky ever since. Now, Winagi was just a chick when we got him back in 1998. He's 21 years old this year. Actually, no, he's 23 years old this year, if I've got my math correct. And we got to watch him grow up. Now, when eagles are first born, they look very different. They're all brown from the tip of their head all the way down to their toes. They have yellow on their toes and the very tip of their beak, but their head is brown, their tail is brown, their eyes are brown, and most of their beak is brown as well. And as they age, they grow up and they get their adult plumage. At about 3 to 5 years of age, they start to change. They start molting in white head and tail feathers, their eyes start to lighten, and their beak starts to change color starting at the cere, where their nostrils are. By the time they're between 5 and 7 years old, they're fully adult, they have their white head and tail, their beautiful golden eyes, and their yellow beak, and they're ready to take a mate and start raising chicks. And I mentioned molting. Every year, birds lose their old feathers and grow in new ones, because if you've broken a feather during the year, you want to make sure you have a good, healthy set. And so every year they drop their old feathers and grow in new ones, and they replace them a few at a time, symmetrically. That way if they lose a feather on one side, that doesn't make them lopsided when they're flying, because that can make a big difference in the pattern of your flight. Now we have to collect all the feathers that our birds molt and send them to the Feather Repository in Colorado. All native birds are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and bald and golden eagles are also protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Act. This makes it illegal to possess any part of them, even including shed feathers. Because the thing is, you can't tell if a feather was dropped by the bird naturally during the molting process or if it was yanked out, and so it was better just to make them all illegal so people wouldn't take the birds for their feathers. The only exception to this is for Native Americans. Because feathers are such an important part of their cultural heritage, they're the only ones allowed to have native bird feathers. And so that's where the feathers in the Feather Repository go. Native Americans write in and will go, I need a feather for such and such reason, and the feathers get sent out to them. Now, Winagi is a bald eagle. Bald eagles are the symbol of America. They are protected under many, many different laws. The Endangered Species Act protected them for a while. And as I said, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Bald and Golden Eagle Act. And their numbers are doing wonderfully well. Washington State has I think it's the second highest population of bald eagles of any of the states. And they're doing tremendously well. They're off the endangered species list. But back many years ago, this was not the case. We actually thought for a while that we would lose the bald eagle, we would lose our national bird. At one point we had fewer than 400 mated pairs in the entire lower 48 states. That's not a lot of eagles. Part of the problem was that people thought they were nuisance birds. They tend to hang out around calving grounds, and farmers were under the impression that the eagles were hunting their calves. What the eagles were actually after was the afterbirth. A newborn calf would be way too big for a bald eagle to catch. These guys weigh between 7 and 14 pounds, and they can only carry up to their own body weight. And so an eagle like Winagi, he's about an 8-pound bird, could carry up to an 8-pound animal, but would be actually much more comfortable carrying about half his body weight, maybe a 4-pound fish. Now, bald eagles do specialize in fish. They're part of the sea eagle family, whereas golden eagles are part of the booted or true eagle family. And bald eagles do love water, they love hunting for fish, and they have a lot of specialized adaptations to help them with this. One, they have kind of a rough, scaly pattern on the bottom of their feet. This increases their grip, makes it easier for them to hold on to slippery fish. They also have a ratchet system in their talons. And what that means is once they've locked on full pressure, they don't release until they relax. Now, bald eagles can exert up to 200 pounds per square inch of squeezing pressure with their talons. Golden eagles can do 300 pounds per square inch of squeezing pressure. Now, this leather glove is on my arm is for Winagi to stand on. Keeps my arm safe from his sharp talons and gives him a better grip rather than having to stand on my shirt, but it doesn't at all protect me from the strength of Winagi's talons. If something were to frighten him, or if he were to get incredibly angry with me and he squeezed down full pressure, he would be more than capable of breaking my arm. So again, you have to have that bond of trust between bird and handler. I have to trust him not to squeeze down very hard, not to get agitated and to attack, and he has to trust me to keep him safe from all the things that he can't see. Because you may notice Winagi's left eye, the one facing out towards you, looks a little bit different. We're not entirely sure what happened to his left eye, but after he'd been here for a couple of years, we noticed it was getting a little bit clouded. Our best guess is his roommate at the time flew a little bit too close and scratched his eye with a feather. And unfortunately, we weren't able to clear it up fast enough with antibiotics. We had a choice. We could either do surgery to remove the infection entirely, or we could let him go blind naturally, just using medication to make sure the infection didn't spread any farther. We elected to let him go blind naturally so he didn't have to wake up from surgery half blind, and he's adjusted fairly well to the change. But that does mean he lacks some depth perception, and when he's on the glove like this, he can't see anybody on that side of him. And so he has to trust me not to let anybody scary sneak up on him. And you can see Winagi has a very sharp beak. The upper part of the eagle's beak is actually sharpened to cut through fish scales. They also have that overhang on their eyes, that brow ridge, to help cut through the glare on water so they can see the fish swimming below the surface. Now, bald eagles in the wild can live 25, 30 years, but again, in captivity, eagle lifespans and natural bird lifespans are extended because they don't have to worry about hunting as they age. And so Winagi here at 23 years old is actually middle-aged for a captive living bald eagle. We expect him to live into his 30s, 40s, hopefully even 50s. Now, Winagi has been at Sardis for a very long time, and as I said, we got to watch him grow up, and so we've got to learn a lot about his personality. He knows he's the star of the show. He's a very proud bird, but he does have some fun quirks. Bald eagles love water, and he has a very large pool that he likes to bathe in, especially on hot days. And when he first came to Sardis, we actually put, as a joke, a rubber duck in his pool just so he had something to entertain himself with. Enrichment is very important for these birds when they're living in captivity because they are in smaller enclosures than the great outdoors. We want to make sure they have a fun and interesting time, that they're actually enjoying their time here at Sardis. We thought the duck would just be something interesting, a novelty in the pool for Winagi to look at. Well, it turns out he now thinks that pools have to have rubber ducks in them. And so he won't actually use the pool unless we bring a duck for him. He thinks that's an important part of his enrichment for going in the water. He's also a very picky bird. As I said, we feed our birds chicken and rats, but we also get donations of fish sometimes. And because bald eagles are salmon eaters, we're very happy to feed the birds fish. And we made the mistake one year of giving Winagi a donation of Copper River salmon. Now, this is the high quality, the good stuff, the very yummy salmon. And don't ever let anybody tell you that a bald eagle can't taste. Winagi can tell the difference. For years afterward, he would not touch any other donations of salmon that weren't Copper River salmon. He was holding out for the good stuff. He's finally decided that as long as it's relatively fresh, non-Copper River salmon will do, but he does have his preferences. Now, bald eagles can have between a 6.5 to an 8-foot wingspan. It's larger on females because they're the larger birds. Winagi has about a 7-foot wingspan, as he's pretty small for a male bald eagle. And hopefully he'll let me show off his beautiful wings. Gonna show off Winagi? There we go. He doesn't have them all the way spread out, but you can see he's got all of his feathers, that gap on the left wing, and he's doing very well. Hi. There we go. There we go. As you can see his nice long feathers, and he's showing off his long wingspan. Now again, bald eagles use their wings to soar. They'll glide on thermals and fly through the air, so they don't expend as much energy once they've gotten up into the air. Now, as I said, at 5 to 7 years old, bald eagles reach maturity. At that point, they take a mate. Like many birds of prey, bald eagles mate for life, and they come back to the same nest site year after year. And they'll add on to that nest site, making adjustments, making the nest larger, and this can result in some very large nests. The largest nest on record was 18 feet deep, so it was 18 feet from top to bottom. It was 9 feet wide, and it weighed over 3 tons. Now, Winagi's nest wasn't quite that large, but you can imagine if it was a very old nest, generations of bald eagles using it, how a nest like that would overbalance a tree when the roots were undermined. And that's why Winagi's tree fell down when the lake water was raised. You can see Winagi's very alert. He's looking around him, keeping an eye on any wild birds he might see in the vicinity. Even though he only has one eye, he's still very aware of his surroundings. So this is Winagi, the star of Sardis Raptor Center, and one of our most beloved ambassadors.
So, I thought you did an awesome job. I've learned so much. I was saying you're like an encyclopedia. So there's some things that I think would be interesting to know about the birds. The first one, which was the Harris.
The Harris's hawk, yes.
And you had said that the Harris hawk is also over 20 years old?
Yes, I actually think I did the math wrong in my talk. He was hatched in 1998, so that would make him 23 years old.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. He looks so young. I wish I could look that good.
He does. And he's got lots of energy.
So the other thing I had asked earlier was the fact that a Harris hawk is also, it's used often as
a falconry bird? Yes, so here in the United States, native birds can only be held in captivity for about 3 reasons. If they're in the rehabilitation program, trying to go back to the wild, if they're part of an education program like Sardis Raptor Center, or if they're a falconry bird. Falconers are people who train birds of prey to hunt with them, going after things like rabbits, prey animals, or trophy animals. It's an ancient sport, it's been around for years, and it's highly regulated. You have to have a permit. I think it takes years and years to get your permit to be a master falconer. And so birds like Heyoki are bred as falconry birds. Falconers will also take birds from the wild. They have to take a bird that's more than a year old, is my understanding, but there's a certain age range they have to take. And they're young birds, so they're old enough that they know they're birds of prey. They're not imprinted on humans, but they're young enough they're still learning how to hunt. And those first few years for birds can be a little bit tricky. I know with bald eagles, only 50% of the bald eagles survive their first year, because once they're on their own, their parents aren't hunting for them, they're relying on themselves to hunt. On average, birds of prey are successful about 1 in 10 attempts to catch prey. That's a lot of wasted energy if you don't get any food out of it. And so when falconers take these young birds from the wild, they have them hunting with them, trained to hunt. And so even if the bird misses and isn't successful in hunting, they can get another chance, and the falconer will give them food if they didn't get it themselves. And so it gives these birds kind of a buffer. While they're still learning, they can fine-tune their skills without having to worry about starving, and then the falconers release them a few years later. Or they'll take birds like Heyoki, who've been bred in captivity, who are not to be released because they're too socialized to people, and they'll train those birds to hunt with them or to do education shows and things like that. And again, Heyoki was supposed to be a falconer's bird, but he's very small for a Harris hawk, and they just didn't think that he'd make a good falconry bird for that reason. But he makes an excellent education bird instead.
Thank you. So with the barred owl, you had mentioned that the skeleton was similar to a raptor, I think.
Yes, so owls look very different from hawks and eagles, but they have a very similar skeleton underneath their feathers. The feathers are just kind of layered on each other in such a way that the owl looks much rounder. But they are all raptors. Hawks, eagles, owls, and falcons are all different kinds of raptors. I was told that a raptor is a bird that hunts with their feet. Now, raptors also include vultures, which are generally not hunters, they're scavengers. Vultures are one of the only birds that have a sense of smell. Turkey vultures can smell rotting food up to a mile away, and so they will clean up the carcasses that other predators have left out in the fields. They'll go after roadkill or things like that. They're kind of nature's cleanup crew. But they are considered vultures, like owls, like hawks and eagles. And actually, the largest raptors are vultures because condors are vultures, and they are the largest birds of prey. But a bird of prey is a bird that hunts with their feet. Thank you for joining us today and learning about these wonderful birds. Once again, we are Sardis Raptor Center. We specialize in rehabilitating injured birds of prey and getting them back out to the wild. If you enjoyed the birds you saw today and want to see more of them, we do have a great number of permanent residents who spend all their time here at Sardis, and we are open to the public for tours on Saturdays from 11 to 4. It's by donation, so feel free to stop by and meet these wonderful birds in their natural environment. Thank you, and thank you for joining us.